Content warning. The stories and themes shared throughout this podcast may contain themes that can be distressing for you. If needed, please pause and do what you need to do to take care of yourself. If needed, please reach out to a mental health professional for support.
Welcome back to another episode of Resilient AF with Blair and Alana, but you'll notice that this is not Alana. This is our dear friend, Chelsea Pegues. In fact, Alana doesn't even know I'm recording with you, so she's going to be a little sad. So this is only going to be part one. This is going to be part one. Alana, I'm sorry. Don't hate me.
Scandalous.
So we were actually just with Chelsea. I don't know when this is airing, but we were just with Chelsea in New York, in her home state, near her hometown. Alana lives in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm in Kamloops, British Columbia. We've only met Chelsea in person a few weeks ago. We've been talking with her online for a while. Absolutely adore her. Every time she talks, I'm just like captivated. And I'm so honored that she is here today. So thank you so much for being here, Chelsea.
Thank you for having me. No pressure at all to be captivating
Oh,
and charismatic.
it's just your personality. And you know what? Okay, so who's Chelsea? She's a freelance writer, proofreader, and editor based in the Hudson Valley region of New York. Since losing her dad to alcohol use disorder in 2020, she is honored and humbled to speak about addiction and recovery as much as possible. In an effort to be a force for change and advocate for those in need, her desire moving forward is to apply her creativity and skills to projects that make a positive impact in the world. And what is so special about this specific story is that unfortunately I can relate. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I would love to like dive into your story and to talk about your dad. You said, your dad died suddenly from addiction and you had to learn to live without your best friend and understand addiction. And I'd love to learn about your story and starting off with like your dad, his name. Tell us about him and your life with him and tell us all the things, Chelsea.
Thank you. I love talking about my dad, honestly. My dad's name is Eddie Crucy. He went by the stage name Sticky with two eyes because he was a professional drummer.
Wait,
Um,
Stikii.
STII, like two
Oh,
drumsticks,
oh,
CKY, Sticky.
I love that.
Yeah, he was talk about creative. He was just the best. I posted about it the other day, but my first musical memory is of dancing around in the kitchen with my dad to Little Richard. I think it was Tutti Frutti was the song, but I have just always had an affinity for early rock and roll and blues because of my dad. He was very Clint Eastwood. He was like a squinty guy, like tall, squinty, mysterious, but his not his smile, but his laugh lit up a room. Like he just had that deep belly laugh and he was so engaging. But unfortunately, part of being a musician sometimes is drug and alcohol use. And my dad came of age in the Catholic school era of the late 50s, early 60s. And here in New York, that wasn't always such a good thing. There was a lot of physical and emotional abuse happening. And I think he went through a lot of trauma that he didn't speak about, turned to alcohol at a very young age and sort of never looked back. So when he was sober, he was literally the best. We could talk forever and ever about anything. And when he was drinking, it was never physically abusive, but it was just the level of obnoxious was just unbearable. Like you just couldn't be around him. It was so ridiculous. Um, and so, yeah, it was the duality was really, really hard to deal with from a very, very young age. I learned to be, and I'm sure you develop that hypervigilance, like you
Mhm.
can tell from the second someone picks up the phone if they're in the bag or
Yeah.
if they're sober. You learn to try not to exacerbate the situation. And you start walking on eggshells real early in life, right?
Yeah. Oh. So do you want to call for this interview, should we call him Eddie or Sticky?
Call him Eddie. I think that's more
Eddie.
natural for me.
Yeah. Eddie sounds like he was really fun, but also, that the relationship could have been, very challenging. Did you live in the same home as him?
Yeah, so I grew up with both my parents in the same house, and it's something that I write about a lot, but I have this one core memory of our first Christmas Eve in the house that I grew up in. So we moved into a house when I was 8. And I don't know what started the fight, but my dad got drunk, my parents started fighting, and all of a sudden we're all in the kitchen and my mom is wielding a knife at my dad. And I'm like on the floor, sobbing and screaming, like, please, I can't take it anymore. Just got a divorce. Like, enough is enough. So I think my parents thought that moving to a house from an apartment and having a backyard and like all the things would fix their marriage. To back up a little bit, my mom really, really loved my dad. I have no doubt. But you can't marry a musician and then expect them not to play gigs and like be out at clubs and bars and restaurants and things like that. Um, and my mom was very jealous, and my dad had a drinking problem. So there was always fuel on the fire. Um, my dad and I used to escape a lot into the woods. We would go hiking all the time. We were constantly outside. We were in the park, all of that. So again, it was so frustrating for me to have this man who was so gregarious, so smart, so well-rounded, and so talented, consistently risking everything for alcohol. His marriage, our family life, he was a drummer, but by day he worked for Federal Express. He was a professional driver, so he was
Mhm.
out delivering packages. And when I was 20 years old, I remember he had relapsed. He was drinking again because he would have long stretches of sobriety and then fall right back into it. I went down to the basement where his drums were, and I found a huge bottle of vodka hidden in his bass drum because no one will ever look there. So I emptied the vodka and I wrote him a really long letter, and I was like, please stop doing this. I
Mhm.
cannot take it anymore. I love you. I don't want to see anything happen to you. This has to stop. I stuck the letter in the bottle and I put it back in the bass drum. And I'm like, maybe he'll feel stupid now because he knows that I found it. He'll read the letter, he'll feel guilty, he'll stop. 2 nights later, at 4 in the morning, my mom and I got a call that my dad had been arrested for DUI, which is super problematic when you have a commercial driver's license. They frown on that.
Yeah.
So it put everything at risk, everything. It put our house at risk. His job was at risk. It was a huge, huge stressor. Thankfully, his job turned out to be okay in the end. The marriage did not survive. When I was 23, as I was getting married, my parents were getting divorced finally. Um, and it was just always the roller coaster. Now, in 2020, there was a long period right before the pandemic really started taking hold where my dad was sober and he was doing extremely well. And I was so happy because I had my son. By this point, my son was 6,
Hmm.
and they were so close. And my dad loved children. He was so good with them. And everything felt good, like it was falling into place. And then the fucking pandemic happened. And the isolation and the fact that we couldn't gather for Thanksgiving and, all of the things really started taking hold. And in November, I realized that he had started drinking again. And I was, Blair, when I tell you furious, I'd had it. He'd had a stroke by this point. He had had pancreatitis so many times that the doctor looked at him in the eye with me in the room and said, if you touch alcohol one more time, you will die.
Yeah.
And so he relapsed and I couldn't handle it anymore. And the last time I spoke to him, was December 18th, 2020. I called him that morning just to say like, hey, are you okay? Are you alive? Pretty much. My dad and I used to be able to talk for hours about everything. This conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes because I just couldn't handle it. It was 9 a.m. and he was like hammered.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, listen, I just wanted to check on you, make sure you're okay. I gotta go. And I remember the sound of his voice, like he was really straining. And he goes, all right, kiddo, I love you. Have a good day. And I'm like, yeah, I love you too. And I hung up on him. And that was the last time we ever spoke. A couple of days later, on December 23rd, I woke up in the morning and I went for a run, and the sun was rising, and the sky was the pinkest sky I'd ever seen, like on fire. My dad's favorite color was pink. And it was Blair, it was like the world was consumed in fire and light and just brightness. I can't even properly articulate it. It was immaculate. And I literally stopped running and just started snapping photos of it. And I sent him a couple to his phone. And I just got a really weird feeling. And then a couple of hours later, my mom called me. And they were divorced again at this point, but they lived around the corner from each other and they remained best friends.
Mm-hmm.
And she calls me and she says, nobody in the building that your dad lives in has seen him in a couple of days, and somebody is complaining that there's a really foul odor coming from the hall. Do you maybe want to check on him? And I was so angry, I called the police instead. And I said, do a wellness check on my dad, please. And I'm thinking, all right, they're going to bang on his door and he's going to be so embarrassed because maybe he threw up and passed out.
Mm.
And then they never called me back.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, 20 minutes goes by, and then almost an hour goes by, and I'm like, why isn't anyone calling me back? And my husband and I looked at each other, and I was like, no, that's impossible. That's ridiculous. So I hop in the car, and I'm scooting down the parkway, and I had just gotten onto the parkway, and my husband called me, and he said, listen, I heard back from one of the neighbors, and he's gone. And I just blacked out. I don't even remember the entire drive to getting there. I remember meeting the detectives at his door, and that's why no one called me back, because when it's an unattended death, they have to investigate for fear of foul play. But he had drank himself to death, and unfortunately, all of the things that come with the gastrointestinal problems when that happens, and he fell asleep and never woke up, essentially. Um, and they wouldn't let me see him. I never got to see him. And that was it. That was the end of a 35-year friendship. And it's like when that happens, you're just so angry. You're
Mm.
so angry. Why was this so much more important than me, than my son, than your family? It was like, and that's why the sky was so pink that day, because he was gone already. And he was like reaching out to me, is how I feel about it now. In the wake of that, is when you start searching for answers, you
Mm-hmm.
know, as a griever. And it becomes, well, what do I do now? How do I grieve? What am I supposed to do? And there are no stages, there is no formality to it. Um, and then all of a sudden, it's almost like the universe algorithm knew what I needed.
Mm.
And you start looking online, and then I found the Dopey podcast hosted by Dave Manheim, which is all about drugs and addiction. And through Dave, I found the author Erin Carr, and she is a recovering heroin addict. And through all of these little chains of people, I started becoming more and more educated about addiction and what it actually is and what it means, and the fact that no, it's not more important than anything. It is a disease. It is a trick of the mind, if you will, that unfortunately you can't escape from. And it doesn't mean that anything is more important than you or your love for that person. It's
Mhm.
just, God, if I could wave a magic wand and have one wish, it would be to erase addiction from the surface of the planet because, you
It's just,
know,
it's a disease. It's like cancer. It's a
hmm
disease. It's a disease and it ruins a lot of people's lives.
yeah, yeah, for
And
sure.
I just want to say, oh my gosh, like I just want to reach through the screen and give you a big hug and like,
Thank you.
Eddie's with us and the gift of that bright pink sky
Yeah.
is a really beautiful, I guess pink lining, silver lining.
I like that, a pink
Yeah,
lining.
to that moment. And I think it's when it comes to addiction, and then like I'm not sure what you really understood about it before, but it sounds like you and I were on similar paths in the sense of, but my parents divorced when I was really little, and my dad stopped being in my life. He was in and out of my life. And, Blair, I'll come to your birthday party and not showing up, or I'll pick you up for dinner and not showing up. And I came to the conclusion my dad stopped loving me, and we were very close. So I grew up thinking my dad didn't love me, and that obviously did a number on my mental health. But in my 20s, I decided to just accept him for who he was and forgive him. And whatever relationship he was able to give me, like I will just take it. And we developed this beautiful relationship where I learned about addiction and that he was unwell. And, every time I got together with him, he'd come visit me and we lived in different cities, I'd understand more and more. And what I learned was that he loved me that entire time. And all I needed was an adult to say, your dad loves you. He's just not well. And
Yeah.
that probably would have changed a lot of things in my life and in my formative years and how I maneuvered the world. And I really do understand and watched not only the addiction, like my dad didn't die suddenly. He's almost died a few times. His addiction was crack. It started off with cocaine, then injecting, and then crack. And like he tried to get sober a few times and it was very hard and it didn't really work, but that slowly killed him with
Yeah.
COPD and then eventually lung cancer. And like regardless of, addiction taking you suddenly from an OD versus slowly killing you, like we have to know as a society that it's a disease. It needs to be treated like a disease. Maybe at one point there was the choice to pick up the bottle or to try the drug, but some people's brains are not wired in a way where they can stop. And I get
Yeah.
that because I'm almost 7 years sober because I'm wired like my dad.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and that's why I think this conversation, in honor of Eddie is so important because, I feel like we're both vintage millennials born mid 80s, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
85.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. So we're the same age. Same thing. So my
Vintage
dad,
millennial.
yeah, I say vintage, we're vintage millennials, but
I
like
love it.
when someone's like, "Oh, you're a geriatric millennial," I'm like, "I'm not a fucking dinosaur." Like, no. Elder. I'm like, I am not wise enough to be an elder. I'm
Yeah,
vintage.
please. Now remind me your dad's name again. I want to say
L-
Jacob.
Leonard.
Leonard. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know where I got Jacob
Yeah,
from,
that
but
works. But yeah, so it's funny. My dad was a drummer.
oh,
Not a
nice.
professional drummer. He drummed in a band. His nickname was Rocco, but like eventually ended up in the gemology diamond industry and someone introduced him to cocaine. And
Wow.
but like and there's a lot about my dad I don't know. Like a lot.
Yeah.
Like I'll never know. I only know the tip of the iceberg and I only know what has been shared and there's lots of things I've learned that I wish I didn't know and but like I think then like our parents in that generation like they didn't really know that much about addiction.
Anything. Yeah. Well,
Anything really.
I hate to say it like that, but it's true because
Yeah.
I think my dad always thought that the only option for an alcoholic was Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah.
I think he really of course, with Alcoholics Anonymous, what do they start out with? The Serenity Prayer. And by that point, my dad was so adverse to anything religious adjacent, you know, anything of that nature. He was like automatically turned off because of his prior experience in his formative schooling. Um, and so he never sought alternative methods. He never sought therapy of any kind. He was so turned off by it. So there's that. There's the mental health
Yeah.
aspect of the boomer generation and not speaking about it, keeping everything bottled up inside. And, also too, my grandmother, my dad's mother, drank herself to death as well. So it's like, and much like you, I'll be 4 years sober on January 1st.
That's my sober birthday too.
Nice. Oh my God, twins.
So Chelsea and I are the same. My
Or you
American
just
twin.
separated at birth. Um, but yeah, and much like you, I thankfully did not suffer that way, but I started thinking, what is this really bringing to my life? What is this doing for me? I don't want my son to ever have the memories that I have of the smell of the Carlo Rossi bottle wow, I just got real New York with that one.
I don't even know what that means, but I believe you.
Carlo Rossi is our jugs of wine. It's like a cheap wine that you can
Oh,
buy at like, the corner store for $6 or whatever. But it was always sitting at the bottom of our pantry. And I just have this very vivid memory of it as a child. I just didn't want my son to have those core experiences. And I didn't want to ever have to worry. God forbid there's an emergency in the middle of the night. If I'm passed out drunk, who's driving?
yeah.
I just didn't
Yeah.
want it to ever be a problem. But I've been watching a lot of Matthew Perry interviews lately, and I love what he said very recently in one of them. He said that it is an allergy of the body. I think he said it's an allergy of the body and a weakness of the mind, something to that effect.
Mm,
And whether or not anyone listening wholly agrees, I'm inclined to agree because the more I started learning about addiction, the more I thought to myself, well, yeah, obviously, because there are some people who can smoke a cigarette and then never smoke again.
mm,
There are some people who can do coke casually and like never worry about it. And with alcohol, there are people who can have a sip of wine here and there and it never becomes a problem. And then there are people like our dads. My dad he needed to feel that buzz. He would always say, I like the way it makes my head feel.
yeah.
I need that buzz to tap in. Um, and so I'm really inclined to agree with that. And I think what you said hits the nail on the head. You need someone when you're an outsider to tell you the love is there, the relationship is there. Unfortunately, the person that you love is very unwell.
Hmm.
My husband, I used to get so mad at him because he loved my dad. They were very close.
Mm,
And he would go and visit my dad and just sit with them. And
mm,
if my dad wanted to have a little drink of something, my husband would just sit with him and let him do it. And I'm like, why are you feeding into this? And my husband always said all the time, because one day he's not going to be here. And I don't want to look back and have that regret.
wow.
And I really wish I had been that open-minded to understand that medically assisted treatment is a thing,
Mm,
that some people need certain drugs to
mm.
survive, and
Yeah.
that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're falling behind or that you're not sober and you're not recovering.
Yeah.
That some people will get physically sick. It'll be worse if they don't drink. So maybe they do need to have, doctor specified doses of alcohol throughout the day just to keep them standing upright and functioning in the world.
Yeah.
There's all different modalities to recovery. And even if they make me uncomfortable, that's okay. My discomfort is nothing compared to what someone suffering with addiction is going through.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I'm just
And
going to have to learn to live with it.
yeah, and like it's interesting that you say that like harm reduction is so important, right? And like I know friends, I never went through AA. I basically stopped cold turkey. I have been to meetings to support other sober friends, and I actually have been to one meeting in person, and it was a Jewish AA meeting. I took my dad to. And it was his first meeting ever. In fact, the person running it gave him a book about the 12-step program in Judaism and the Serenity Prayer in English and in Hebrew. And when my dad died, he had very little things to his name, with just a couple drawers. And when he moved into his like final like hospital room, he actually had that with him. So now I have it. But I have a lot of friends who have different journeys in sobriety, and the harm reduction approach, I believe, can still be considered sober because,
Yeah,
yeah, because,
absolutely.
yeah. And I think it's about us being open as a society and learning about all of this instead of just judging. When you drive down the street and you see people on the street, maybe they're bent over using fentanyl or they're passed out. It's like they're not really choosing that life. They're so mentally unwell. They're sick. And looking at it with empathy and compassion instead of through the lens of shame is so important. And for us, being born in the 80s, raised in the 90s, our parents, their parents, the community I was raised in, like it was more like disappear and hide it, not like how can we help? So if
Yeah,
you and I can raise awareness of these conversations and bring the issues to light, it perhaps will, one listener at a time, etc. If their perception can change just a little bit to have more empathy and compassion, the world can be a lot better of a place and more people will get the support they need.
yeah, absolutely. And I love what you just said, that the people that are bent over on the street aren't using because they want to be freezing cold on a street corner with people gawking at them. And, it's kind of like, if someone approaches my window in traffic and asks for cash,
Mhm.
I hope that you're using the cash to maybe get yourself something to eat or whatever. That would be
Yeah.
great. But if you're shaking and you're getting physically sick because you need a nip of something and you go and you do that, I mean, if it keeps you alive for one more day, maybe that's one more day where you'll see something else later on that will inspire you to get help.
Hmm.
I never know what steps you're taking. And so, yeah, if I have cash on me, I'll give it. And
Yeah.
I say that to my son. He was with me the other day when that happened. And I was able to give this gentleman a $10 bill that I happen to have on me. And I was so glad that I had cash because he so clearly needed it.
Yeah.
And my son was like, "Oh, that was nice." And I'm like, "Listen, it's his money now. What he does with it is totally up to
Yeah.
him, but I hope that he finds a way to go toward healing and
Yeah.
not harming."
And it's interesting that you did that. So my dad really needed a lot of help at the end. Like when he learned he was terminal, like he had a lot of brain damage because like no oxygen to the brain. And
Yeah,
he got to a point where like he needed a lot of support. And like I'd stopped giving my dad money. And if he needed things like groceries, I would just send him groceries. But
right.
it's interesting that you say that because for me, why, first of all, never have cash because
I know, it's so rare. It is so
But
rare. I felt
but
really
if
good that
someone
day.
is standing somewhere like outside a coffee shop and I have that ability, I'll ask them like, "Are you hungry? Like, do you want me
Yeah,
to get you something?" And I don't give out cash because well, I don't even have cash of my own, but I will offer like I will if I am in a place where I can offer to
absolutely.
or if I'm at a restaurant and I don't do this as much because I where I live now it's not like this, but when I was more urban center, like urban dwelling, if I
Yeah,
had leftovers, I always took them and if someone was hungry and they wanted them, I would give them my leftovers.
yeah,
And I mean, I think it's like even the having that compassion of like getting a hot cup of coffee or hot chocolate or tea to someone who needs it. If they say no, I just want money, that's on them.
yeah.
And if you
Sorry.
have the money and you want to give it to them, that's cool too. Like, but I
Yeah,
mean, it's also about starting with that compassion, right? Like looking at that person who needs that help, not with the lens of shame, but
yeah.
not why are you doing this, but what happened to you?
Yeah,
What happened?
and of course, there are people that will approach you and you can kind of tell, like,
Yeah.
you can suss it out. I'll leave it at that, but you can always suss it out, like when someone is really in need
Yeah.
of help. And I always, say that to my son. There's a program in our area called Search for Change, and it houses people who are kind of in transition from being in a mental health facility because of drugs or addiction, any sort of addiction. And then they're kind of getting back on their feet. So I hate to use the term, but like a halfway house kind
Yeah.
of deal for people who are transitioning back into mainstream society after really hitting pretty much rock bottom because of addiction. And there's someone that we see pretty often in the neighborhood. And he, when my son was smaller, he used to call this gentleman Big Beard because he's very tall and he just has this huge, like Santa Claus beard.
Yeah.
And so one day we're driving by and we see him. My son goes, "Hey, there goes my boy Big Beard." And I'm like, "Oh my God." So the next time we were walking to the park, we happened to see this gentleman and he said hello to us and we kind of struck up a conversation and I said, "Can I ask you your actual name because my son calls you Big Beard and I feel like that's not appropriate." And he laughed. He had this like such hearty, joyous laugh and it reminded me of my dad and you could tell like he was enjoying the interaction and he
Yeah.
just
Well, we
got a
crave human
kick.
connection.
Yes, he got a kick out of the connection, and we really formed like this special bond with him. So now we see each other, we say hi, we have little conversations here and there. He loves our dog. It's a nice little bond. And recently something happened to him, and he suffered a break. He had a relapse, and he suffered like a really bad break. And I heard that he went for treatment and he was gone. I mean, we didn't see him for at least 3 months. And I was starting to get really nervous. I thought something horrible had happened to him. And then one day he just popped up in our local park again and he was there and we were so happy and he was so happy to see us. And it was like, "Are you okay?" And he's so thankful that someone thought of him and asked about him. And, it sucks, man. Like mental health sucks when you are suffering in that way and no one acknowledges you and you feel invisible. I can't imagine how that feels. And going back, to my dad, it breaks my heart when I think about the fact that he was alone. It breaks my heart to think about the fact that he might have been alone for a couple of days. I acknowledge his death date being December 23rd
Hmm.
because that's the day that I found out that he was gone.
Yeah.
But I don't know for sure. I don't know how long he was gone. Um, and that is the worst part. That I told him I loved him before we hung up the phone that day, but it was so flippant and petulant and not at all what I would have said if I had known that it was the last time I was ever going to speak to him.
It's hard.
Um, that's the worst. That's the worst part. My dad was my hero. I hope he died knowing that.
He for sure did.
I
He,
know that he did, but I really
yeah.
hope that he did.
Chelsea,
Um,
yeah. Oh, I'm hugging you. And
I
the
know.
thing is, regardless of how you say it, I love you or "Oh, I love you," like in frustration. Like I had a mom where I said that a lot too in frustration. The tone obviously matters, but the words are still there in the sense of like, I love you, like, but right now at this moment, I don't like you. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Like,
it's precisely,
right? And I think
precisely.
from what I'm gathering, you're always Eddie's little girl and like,
Always.
best friends. And so that's implied. Like you love each other. And he for sure knew that. And it's just so heartbreaking that that's how he went. And, I really hope this conversation brings a light to people who are still navigating parents who are alive with addiction, and maybe pick up that phone or go sit with them or maybe invite them to go to a meeting of sorts,
Yeah.
or just
Alternative therapy.
remind them that you love them. And, we can't control other people. We can control what we do, right? And
Yeah.
it's just a hard world. And, unfortunately, now even with the more like designer drugs, there's a lot of people who live deep in addiction. And it's not just parents, it's friends, it's, kids, it's a lot of people we don't know, neighbors. And, we have to choose how we navigate that. And, in honor of Eddie, what what advice do you have for those who are maybe navigating a relationship with a parent who have an addiction or alcohol use disorder specifically?
I I think the best thing to do, so a therapist recently told me, um, uh, she was talking about my mom, but I think this applies to specifically children who are dealing with an addicted parent. You don't have to sit with them for a long time. You know, you don't have to go visit them for hours and hours or a full day or anything like that. You can show up for your person, and it could be a 10-minute conversation just to check in and bring them, a sweet treat or something you think that they'll like, and just say, hey, I just wanted to see you face to face, make sure that you're okay, and you can set your limits based on your mental health, because you're going to reach a point where you are going to realize, unfortunately, that either recovery is an option or it's not.
Hmm.
And before your person is gone, I think the trick for the child is to do your best, if you can, to make peace with that and sit with that person as long as you possibly can without hurting your own mental health, and just show up a little bit at a time until the day comes where you don't have them anymore. And that might sound a little dark and it might sound a little depressing, but I kind of wish that someone had said that to me. I know that my husband tried, but I think he was absolutely right. Your
Mm.
days are numbered because addiction is a thief and not everyone will recover. But you're going to be left behind and you're going to need to find solace in your own actions. And I spent so much time beating the shit out of myself after my dad died, thinking that I was the most rotten person on the planet. And I obviously that's not true because I loved him very deeply. But I think that educating yourself, doing what you can to read up on what addiction really means, and then just saying, like, hey, I have 5 minutes to talk to you on the phone. I just want to tell you I love you and see how you're doing today. If you can show up in person, show up in person. Set your own limits, but just do your best to be there, because you'd rather do that than beat yourself up.
Mm.
As grievers, we're gonna have plenty to deal with.
Hmm.
You don't want to should yourself to death as well.
Yeah. I think that's
I hope that's
beautiful.
helpful.
That's very helpful. I mean, like that's a huge part of like my resolution with my dad was just like accepting what it was. And then when he was terminally ill, we lived in different cities. I made him message me every morning when he woke up, and we started off our day just saying hello to each other, and it was something so simple.
Oh, that's beautiful.
My sister didn't have a relationship with him, but once he was terminal, my sister and him had a virtual talk every Sunday.
Love that.
You get to choose that, but you're right. Like, Chelsea, that's such beautiful advice. And I
Yeah.
really, really appreciate you sharing. I know it's just the tip of the iceberg, and that we're going to have you back to talk
I would
more.
love that.
Because I know you have more stories because I heard them. I heard about your tattoo stories and other things. And
Yeah.
I think we're just going to leave that cliffhanger for our listeners.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. But is there any final words you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Well, so one thing when you say dun, 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 as my dad would have said, because he is the character. I would just say thank you so much for what you do on this platform and for giving us a space to tell these stories, because again, it is so important. If you are out there and you're suffering with addiction and you're striving for recovery, it can be done. It's going to suck. It's going to be painful, but you are so worth it, because there is someone on this planet who loves you so much and does not want to talk to the air and hope that you can hear them. We want
Mhm.
you here on this plane with us. And again, like you said, Blair, I think you put it perfectly when you said lead with compassion. You just never fucking know. And everyone, all of us, even you and I sitting here today, we are one mistake away from a totally different life. And you just never know.
Right.
So that's what I would say. Just love each other as hard as it can be sometimes. Just love each other because our time is finite.
That's very wise and so beautiful. And you want to get more of Chelsea in your life, her links are in the show notes.
Thank you.
Yeah, she's absolutely amazing. So please follow her. And thank you so much for joining me today on our podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in to another episode of Resilient AF. Just remember, you are not alone. It is okay to not be okay. Life is full of ups and downs. Like, put one foot in front of the other, take things one moment at a time. We are here to hold your hand and be that light in the darkness. And just remember, you are resilient AF. That's a wrap for another episode of Resilient AF with Blair and Alana. And thank you for listening. Are you feeling inspired to bounce forward?
Let's connect at theglobalresilienceproject.com, where you can read many stories of resilience, buy our books, shop our clothing line, learn more about how to strengthen your resilience muscle, be empowered, and more.
Remember, friends, you are resilient AF.